Cruel family won 70 million in lottery secretly. When they found out, they changed. I was folding my late husband's old winter coat for donation when the lottery ticket fell out. $70 million. Won 6 months ago. The same week my children started treating me like a diseased animal they couldn't wait to put down. The ticket was creased from Harold's wallet, dated 3 days before his heart attack. I stared at those numbers. The same numbers ID played religiously for 20 years using our anniversary date and the kids' birthdays. My hands trembled as the realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just any lottery ticket. This was the ticket Harold bought with his last paycheck, the one ID worked double shifts at the hospital to help him earn. My children had won $70 million and cut me out completely. For months, ID watched them transform from my struggling kids into cold strangers. Sarah, my eldest, suddenly driving a brand new Mercedes and claiming it was a company lease. Michael, my baby boy, taking elaborate vacations to Europe while telling me he couldn't afford to help with my grocery bills. And little Jessica, Harold's favorite granddaughter, avoiding my calls and visits like I carried the plague. The evidence was right there in my shaking hands. The ticket that would explain everything. Why my family had become so distant, so cruel, so eager to push me toward the cheapest nursing home they could find. They'd been planning this for months, pretending to struggle financially while living like royalty behind my back. I sank into Harold's old recliner, the same chair where he used to hold me during Sunday night movies, and let the tears fall. 20 years of playing those same numbers. 20 years of dreaming about what we'd do if we ever won. Harold had always joked that if we hit the jackpot, we'd travel the world together, see the places we'd only read about in National Geographic. Instead, here I was, alone and betrayed, discovering that my own children had stolen not just money, but our dreams. The irony was devastating. ID spent 40 years as a registered nurse, caring for everyone else's families, making sure dying patients weren't alone, comforting grieving relatives. And my own children couldn't wait to dump me in a facility where ID waste away forgotten. The very people ID sacrificed everything for had become my worst nightmare. I thought about the recent conversations that now made perfect sense. Sarah's suggestion about looking into senior communities because my house was too big for one person. Michael's concern about my mental state, hinting that I was becoming forgetful and might need professional care. Jessica's sudden interest in my medical power of attorney paperwork. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were orchestrating my removal from their lives. The lottery ticket felt heavier than paper. It represented everything wrong with what my family had become. Harold would have been heartbroken to know his children could be so calculating, so merciless. Had raised them to be better than this. We both had. Where did we go wrong? How did we create people capable of such casual cruelty? But something else stirred in my chest alongside the heartbreak. Something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, crystalline rage that burned away the confusion and self-doubt I'd been carrying. My children thought they were dealing with a weak-old woman they could manipulate and discard. They had no idea who they were really messing with. ID spent decades making life and death decisions under pressure. ID managed hospital departments, handled medical emergencies, and earned the respect of doctors twice my age. I wasn't some helpless grandmother who would quietly disappear into a corner room smelling of disinfectant and despair. I was Margaret Eleanor Hansen, and ID survived the loss of my husband, raised 3 children as a working mother, and built a life of dignity through sheer determination. They wanted to play games with my future? Fine. But they'd learn quickly that I knew how to play games too. And I played to win. Looking at that lottery ticket, I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about showing 3 ungrateful adults that the woman who taught them everything they knew about survival wasn't ready to be buried alive. If they thought they could steal from me and walk away clean, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Harold always said I was too soft with the children, too willing to forgive and forget. Maybe it was time to prove him wrong. Maybe it was time to show everyone. Exactly what Margaret Hanson was capable of when pushed too far. I carefully placed the lottery ticket in my jewelry box, next to Harold's wedding ring and my grandmother's pearls. Evidence. The foundation of everything that was about to change. My children thought they held all the cards, but they'd just handed me the ace of spades. The game was about to begin, and they had no idea they were already losing. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed everything ID suspected. Sarah's voice was honey-sweet with fake concern, the tone she'd perfected over months of manipulation. "Margaret, we need to talk about your living situation. Michael and I have been discussing it, and we really think it's time to consider assisted living. You're getting older, and we worry about you being alone in that big house." I gripped the phone tighter, watching through my kitchen window as my neighbor Mrs. Patterson worked in her garden. She was 82 and still lived independently, still drove herself to the grocery store and church every week. But Sarah wanted me to believe that at 68, I was already incompetent. "Have you looked into any facilities yet?" I continued, my voice carefully neutral. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan before revealing my hand. "Well, actually, we've done some research for you. There's a really nice place called Sunset Manor about an hour away. Very affordable, and they have openings next month. We thought we could drive you over there this weekend to take a look." Sunset Manor. I'd heard of that place. It was barely a step above a county facility, known for understaffing and health violations. But it was cheap, which apparently was all that mattered to my children now that they had $70 million burning holes in their pockets. "An hour away," I repeated slowly. "That's quite a distance from family." Sarah's laugh was forced and brittle. "Oh Mom, we'll visit all the time. And it's better for you to be around people your own age, with activities and medical care right there. You won't have to worry about anything." "What about my house?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. "Well, obviously you won't need it anymore. We can handle selling it for you, take care of all the paperwork and stress. You know how complicated real estate transactions can be. We just want to make this transition as easy as possible for you." How generous of them. Handle the sale of my house, the house Harold and I had scrimped and saved to buy 35 years ago, the house where we'd raised our children and built our life together. Handle it right into their own pockets, no doubt. I thought about the equity in this house. Even in Ohio's modest real estate market, it was worth at least $200,000. Money they apparently felt entitled to along with their secret lottery fortune. The greed was breathtaking. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said finally. "Let me think about it and get back to you." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about timing. Sarah had been so quick with her research, so prepared with her answer about the facility. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment suggestion born from genuine concern. This was a calculated plan they'd been developing for weeks, possibly months. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember from recent conversations. Michael mentioning my forgetfulness during last month's dinner. Jessica asking pointed questions about my medical history. Sarah's sudden interest in my financial paperwork. All of it building toward this moment when they would swoop in like vultures and strip away everything Harold and I had built. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I'd spent my entire nursing career dealing with families who thought they could manipulate elderly patients. I'd seen the warning signs 1,000 times. Adult children who suddenly became very interested in their parents' assets while showing no genuine concern for their well-being. I'd reported dozens of cases of elder abuse to social services over the years. I knew exactly what my children were doing because I'd seen it done to countless other families. The difference was that those other elderly patients hadn't known what was happening to them. I did. And unlike those vulnerable seniors, I had resources and connections they didn't know about. I thought about Harold's life insurance policy, the one that had paid out $250,000 after his death. The money I'd quietly invested in bonds and certificates of deposit, building a nest egg for my later years. My children assumed I was living on Social Security and Harold's small pension, but they had no idea about the safety net I'd carefully constructed over decades of financial planning. They wanted to treat me like a helpless woman with no options? Perfect. Let them continue believing that while I planned my response. Sometimes the best strategy was to let your opponents think they were winning right up until the moment you destroyed them. I opened my laptop and started researching. If my children wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand exactly how dirty they'd been willing to go. The lottery ticket was just the beginning. There had to be more evidence of their deception, more proof of their betrayal. What I found over the next 3 hours made my blood run cold. Michael had purchased a $400,000 house in the suburbs 6 months ago, paying cash. Sarah had bought a BMW and enrolled her youngest daughter in private school with a yearly tuition that exceeded many people's annual salaries. They'd been living like millionaires while telling me they couldn't afford to help with my medical co-pays. But the cruelest discovery was Jessica's Instagram account. Photo after photo of expensive vacations, designer clothes, and luxury restaurants. All posted with captions about being grateful for her blessings and living her best life. Not one mention of her grandmother. Not one photo that included me. I'd become invisible to my own family the moment they got their hands on money. Money that should have been mine and Harold's. Money they'd stolen from a dead man's coat pocket. The rage that had been simmering since yesterday erupted into something powerful and focused. They thought they could erase me from their lives like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. They were about to learn that Margaret Hanson didn't disappear quietly. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Eleanor's detective agency. This is Eleanor speaking. Eleanor, this is Margaret Hanson. I need to hire you for a very important job. The revenge was about to begin, and my children had no idea what was coming for them. Harold's journal was hidden exactly where I thought it would be. Tucked inside his old tackle box in the basement, wrapped in plastic and secured with rubber bands, just like he used to protect his important papers during our camping trips. Harold had always been methodical about documentation, a habit from his years working in construction where every detail mattered. My hands shook as I unwrapped the leather-bound book. Harold had written in it almost every day during his final months, documenting his thoughts and concerns as his health declined. I'd never read it before, respecting his privacy even after death. But now, with my children's betrayal fresh in my mind, I needed to understand what Harold had known or suspected before he passed. The entries started normal enough. Observations about the weather, complaints about his arthritis, pride in my work at the hospital. But as I read deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. March 15th, Michael asked me about life insurance again today. Third time this month. Says he's worried about Margaret being provided for, but something feels off about the way he asks. Too eager. Too specific about amounts and beneficiaries. March 22nd, Sarah stopped by to help organize our financial papers. She was very interested in our lottery tickets and asked if we keep copies of the numbers we play. Told her Margaret handles all that, but noticed she wrote something down when she thought I wasn't looking. April 3rd, found Jessica going through our bedroom dresser when she was supposed to be using the bathroom. She said she was looking for aspirin, but the medicine cabinet is in the bathroom. Why would she need to search our personal drawers? Margaret thinks I'm being paranoid, but something isn't right. April 10th, overheard Sarah on the phone talking about assisted living facilities. She said it was for a friend's mother, but when I walked into the room, she hung up quickly. Too quickly. Margaret was at work, so who was she really talking about? My stomach dropped as I continued reading. Harold had been watching our children systematically prepare for something. Head documented their unusual interest in our finances, their probing questions about our assets, their strange behavior around our home. Head known something was wrong, but Head died before he could piece it all together. April 18th, Bought lottery tickets today with my last paycheck. Same numbers we always play. Margaret's worked so hard these past few months, pulling extra shifts to help with my medical bills. If we ever won, first thing I'd do is send her on a real vacation. She deserves to be spoiled for once in her life. That was Harold's final entry, written just days before his heart attack. Head bought those lottery tickets thinking about me, planning to surprise me if we won. Head died never knowing that his children would steal that ticket from his coat the night he passed away. The evidence was overwhelming. My children hadn't just claimed a lottery ticket that didn't belong to them. They'd been planning to manipulate and control me long before Harold died. The lottery money had just accelerated their timeline and made them bolder. But Harold's journal contained something else that made my pulse race. A list of our assets that had been updating, including accounts and investments I'd forgotten about. Harold had been more thorough with our financial planning than even I realized. Some of these accounts had been growing untouched for years. According to his calculations, I wasn't just financially stable. I was wealthy in my own right. The life insurance money, combined with our savings and investments, meant I had over $500,000 in assets my children knew nothing about. They thought they were manipulating a poor old woman dependent on Social Security. They had no idea they were targeting someone who could afford to fight back. I photographed every page of Harold's journal with my phone, then called Eleanor's detective agency again. I need you to investigate lottery winnings in Ohio from 6 months ago. Specifically, I need to know everything about a $70 million jackpot and who claimed it. When Eleanor called back 3 hours later, her findings confirmed my worst fears and gave me the ammunition I needed. Margaret, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is your suspicions were correct. Your son Michael officially claimed the lottery ticket 6 months ago. The good news is that the timing and circumstances of the claim raise some serious legal questions. She explained that Michael had waited almost a full month before claiming the prize, which was unusual for such a large amount. Most winners claimed immediately. More importantly, there were witnesses at the convenience store who remembered Harold buying lottery tickets regularly, always playing the same numbers. The store clerk even recognized the winning numbers as Harold's usual picks. But hey race, the really interesting part, Eleanor continued. Your children have been incredibly stupid about spending the money. They've left a paper trail that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy. Large cash purchases, luxury items, travel expenses. And they've been sloppy about taxes. Very sloppy. My children thought they were smart, but they'd made amateur mistakes that could cost them everything. Their greed had made them careless, and carelessness was something I could exploit. I have a plan, I told Eleanor. But I'm going to need help making it work. What I had in mind would require precision timing, careful coordination, and a level of strategic thinking my children had never seen from their gentle mother. They thought they knew me, thought they understood my limits and capabilities. They were about to discover that 40 years of nursing had taught me skills they couldn't imagine. Managing life and death situations under pressure teaches you to think clearly when everything is falling apart. It teaches you to make hard decisions quickly and execute them flawlessly. It teaches you to compartmentalize emotion and focus on the objective at hand. Most importantly, it teaches you that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is deliver hard truths that people don't want to face. My children needed to learn some hard truths about consequences and accountability. They'd stolen from their dead father and betrayed their living mother. They'd planned to warehouse me in a substandard facility while they enjoyed luxuries bought with blood money. But they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They'd assumed I would go quietly. As I closed Harold's journal and returned it to its hiding place, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my husband's death. Purpose. For months, I'd been drifting through my days, grieving and lost, allowing my children to make decisions about my future. That phase of my life was ending. Margaret Hanson was taking back control, and her ungrateful children were about to learn why their father always said I was the strongest person he'd ever known. The first phase of my plan required careful surveillance and documentation. I needed to understand exactly how my children were spending their stolen fortune and what vulnerabilities their new lifestyle had created. Eleanor's detective work had given me the foundation, but I needed more detailed intelligence before making my move. I hired a technology consultant named Tyler, a 22-year-old computer science student who specialized in digital forensics. Tyler came highly recommended through Eleanor's network, and his services were surprisingly affordable for someone with his skills. Within 48 hours, Head provided me with information that exceeded my expectations. "Your children have been living like lottery winners for months," Tyler reported during our meeting at a coffee shop downtown. Credit card statements show massive spending sprees, luxury hotel stays, expensive restaurants. But hey, race the interesting part, they've been incredibly careless about their digital footprint. He showed me screenshots of social media posts, text message conversations, and financial transactions that painted a picture of people drunk on sudden wealth. My children had documented their spending spree across multiple platforms, apparently believing they were safe from discovery. But the most damaging evidence came from their private communications. Tyler had accessed text message threads between my children and their spouses, conversations that revealed the depth of their betrayal and contempt. From Sarah to her husband, Mom called again asking if we could help with her prescription costs. "It's pathetic how she doesn't realize we're millionaires now." I told her we're struggling too. She actually believed it. From Michael to Sarah, we need to move faster on the nursing home plan. Mom's getting suspicious about our sudden improvements. Yesterday she asked where I got money for the new car. I told her it was financing, but I don't think she bought it. From Sarah to Michael, Jessica feels guilty about lying to Grandma. We need to talk to her before she says something stupid. Remind her that Grandma would just waste the money anyway. At least we're being responsible with it. The casual cruelty of their words was breathtaking. They'd reduced me to a problem to be managed, an obstacle to their happiness that needed to be eliminated. Worse, they were coaching Jessica, my innocent granddaughter, to participate in their deception. But the text that made my blood boil came from Michael to his wife. "The old lady thinks she raised us to be good people. She has no idea how stupid and naive she really is. Dad would be rolling in his grave if he knew how easily we fooled her. Harold wouldn't be rolling in his grave. He'd be planning their destruction, just like I was." Tyler's investigation had also uncovered their spending patterns and financial vulnerabilities. Despite their $70 million windfall, my children were already running into cash flow problems. Lottery winnings are paid out over time, and the lump sum they'd chosen came with massive tax implications they hadn't properly planned for. They'd spent like they had unlimited funds, not realizing that their actual monthly income was far less than they'd anticipated. Credit card debt was mounting, and they'd made several large purchases that required ongoing payments they might struggle to maintain. This information gave me the foundation for phase 2 of my plan. If my children wanted to play financial games, I would show them what real financial manipulation looked like. They thought they were clever, but they were amateurs competing against someone with decades of experience managing complex budgets and resources. I spent the next week setting up the infrastructure for my revenge. New bank accounts, financial instruments, and legal arrangements that would remain invisible until I chose to reveal them. I also began reaching out to contacts from my nursing career, people who owed me favors and would be willing to help when the time came. The beauty of having worked in healthcare for 40 years was the network of relationships I'd built. Doctors, lawyers, social workers, journalists, and business owners who remembered the nurse had gone above and beyond to help their families during medical crises. People who would be shocked to learn how I was being treated and eager to assist in making things right. But the most important call I made was to my old supervisor from the hospital, Dr. Patricia Williams, who now worked in geriatric psychiatry. Patricia specialized in cases involving elder abuse and had testified in dozens of court cases over the years. When I told her what my children were planning, her response was immediate and fierce. "Margaret, what you're describing is textbook elder abuse and financial exploitation. The fact that they're using lies and manipulation to coerce you into institutionalization while stealing your assets makes this a serious criminal matter. We need to document everything and build a case that will protect you and hold them accountable." Patricia agreed to serve as my expert witness and professional advocate. Her credentials would carry weight with authorities and media outlets when the time came to expose my children's crimes. More importantly, her involvement would legitimize my story and make it impossible for my children to dismiss my accusations as the confused ramblings of an elderly woman. As I finalized the details of Phase 2, I thought about justice versus revenge. Justice would be reporting my children to authorities and letting the legal system handle their crimes. Revenge would be destroying their lives as completely and publicly as possible. I decided to pursue both approaches simultaneously. They deserved justice for their crimes, but they also deserved to understand what it felt like to be betrayed by people they trusted. My children thought they held all the power in our relationship. They believed I was dependent on their charity and goodwill for my future security. Tomorrow, they would begin learning how wrong they'd been about everything they thought they knew about their mother. Harold used to say that the most dangerous person in any situation was someone who had nothing left to lose. My children had taken away my dignity, my family relationships, and my sense of security. They'd made me feel powerless and discarded. But they'd forgotten that they'd also given me the gift of clarity. I finally understood exactly who they were and what they deserved. And unlike them, I had the skills, resources, and determination to deliver consequences they would never forget. Phase 2 was about to begin, and my children had no idea that their victim was actually their predator. The fake lottery ticket was Tyler's masterpiece. Using sophisticated printing technology and aged paper, had created a convincing replica of a legitimate Ohio lottery ticket with numbers that would eventually match a drawing scheduled for the following month. The ticket looked authentic in every detail, from the printing quality to the security features. But the genius of the deception wasn't just the ticket itself. Tyler had created an entire digital ecosystem to support the illusion. Fake websites, modified lottery databases, and even a temporary phone number that would play recorded messages from the Ohio Lottery Commission confirming the validity of the ticket. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would plant the fake ticket where one of my children would find it, let their greed do the rest, and then watch as their world collapsed when they discovered the truth. But first, I needed to set the stage for maximum impact. I called Sarah and accepted her invitation to visit Sunset Manor. The nursing home tour would provide the perfect cover for Phase 2 while also documenting their plan to warehouse me in substandard conditions. Eleanor would be following us with surveillance equipment, recording everything for evidence purposes. The facility was worse than I'd imagined. Understaffed, overcrowded, and reeking of disinfectant that couldn't mask the underlying smell of institutional neglect. The staff seemed overwhelmed and underpaid, the residents looked drugged and forgotten, and the entire environment screamed of hopelessness. Sarah walked me through the common areas with fake enthusiasm, pointing out amenities that barely met basic standards while describing them as luxurious features. The dining room served institutional food on plastic plates. The recreation room had one broken television and a handful of worn paperback books. The sleeping quarters were cramped double rooms with thin walls and industrial lighting. "This is perfect for you, Mom," Sarah gushed as we toured a vacant room. "You'll have everything you need right here, and the staff can help with all your daily activities. No more worrying about cooking or cleaning or maintaining that big old house." The room was smaller than my walk-in closet at home. 2 narrow beds separated by a thin curtain, 1 small window that looked out on the parking lot, and a bathroom shared with the adjoining room. This was where my daughter wanted to abandon me to die forgotten. "What about my belongings?" I asked innocently. "My furniture, my photos, Harold's things?" "Oh, you won't need any of that here," Sarah replied quickly. "Everything's provided, and you don't want to clutter up the space. We can handle disposing of your personal items when we sell the house." Disposing of my personal items. 40 years of marriage memories, family photographs, Harold's tools and books, my grandmother's china service. All of it destined for a dumpster because it wasn't worth anything to my children. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the confused elderly woman accepting her fate. But inside, my rage burned brighter than ever. They weren't just stealing my money and freedom. They were erasing my entire existence, wiping away decades of life and love like it had never mattered. During the drive home, Sarah continued her sales pitch with increasing desperation. She needed me to agree to this placement quickly, and I finally understood why. Tyler's financial investigation had revealed that my children were facing a cash flow crisis sooner than they'd anticipated. They needed access to my house's equity to cover their mounting debts. The timeline for their plan was accelerating, which meant I needed to accelerate mine. That evening, I carefully placed the fake lottery ticket in Harold's old jacket pocket, the same coat where the real ticket had been hidden 6 months earlier. I hung the jacket on the back of my kitchen chair, exactly where Harold used to leave it when he came home from work. The symbolism was perfect and deliberate. Then I called Michael and asked him to help me sort through his father's belongings for donation. I mentioned that I'd finally found the strength to go through Harold's clothes and personal items, and I needed emotional support during the process. Michael agreed to come over the next morning, probably seeing an opportunity to influence my decision about the nursing home. When Michael arrived, I was prepared. Hidden cameras courtesy of Tyler captured every angle of the kitchen and living room. Eleanor was positioned across the street with telephoto surveillance equipment. And I had my performance ready. I guided Michael toward Harold's jacket with subtle manipulation that would have made a professional con artist proud. Comments about how Harold always left his coat in that exact spot, how I sometimes still expected to see him walk through the door and hang up his jacket after work, how going through his pockets one final time would help me say goodbye. Michael took the bait perfectly. He offered to check the pockets before we donated the coat, and I watched his face transform when his fingers found the lottery ticket. The greed was immediate and unmistakable. His pupils dilated, his breathing changed, and his entire demeanor shifted from sympathetic son to calculating predator. But instead of telling me about his discovery, Michael palmed the ticket and continued our conversation as if nothing had happened. He helped me fold clothes and pack boxes while the stolen ticket burned in his pocket, another secret he was keeping from his naive mother. The performance was flawless. Michael believed he'd outsmarted me again, discovered another source of wealth he could exploit without my knowledge. He had no idea that every moment of his deception was being recorded in high definition from multiple angles. After Michael left, I immediately called Sarah and shared the fictional story of finding an old lottery ticket in Harold's coat. I played the role of the confused widow who wasn't sure what to do with the mysterious piece of paper. Should I throw it away? Was it even worth checking? Did expired tickets have any value? Sarah's response was exactly what I'd expected. She offered to research the ticket for me, to handle the complicated process of checking its validity. So thoughtful of her to take that burden off my shoulders. So generous to deal with such tedious paperwork on my behalf. Within hours, both of my children were secretly investigating what they believed was a legitimate lottery ticket worth millions of dollars. Tyler's digital infrastructure fed them false information confirming their wildest hopes. Modified websites showed matching numbers. Fake phone calls provided encouraging news about claims processing. My children thought they'd discovered another windfall to steal from their deceased father and clueless mother. They began making plans for this new fortune, discussing how to claim it without my knowledge, calculating how much additional luxury they could afford. But while they plotted their next theft, I was documenting everything. Bank records showing their previous lottery spending, communications revealing their deceptive plans, surveillance footage of Michael stealing from Harold's coat. I was building a case that would destroy them legally, financially, and socially. They thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They had no idea I was playing three-dimensional chess while they were still trying to understand the rules of tic-tac-toe. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and my children were about to learn that their gentle mother was the most dangerous opponent they'd ever faced. Michael quit his job on a Tuesday. Sarah pulled her youngest daughter out of public school and enrolled her in the most expensive private academy in the state on Wednesday. By Friday, they'd both made major financial commitments based on lottery winnings that existed only in Tyler's elaborate digital fiction. I watched their self-destruction unfold with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a controlled experiment. Every decision they made was perfectly predictable, driven by the same greed and entitlement that had led them to steal from their dead father. They'd learned nothing from their previous success and everything from their growing arrogance. The beauty of the plan was that I wasn't forcing them to do anything destructive. I was simply giving them opportunities to reveal their true character, and they were seizing every chance to prove how morally bankrupt they'd become. Each choice was theirs, each consequence would be self-inflicted, each moment of eventual humiliation would be entirely earned. Sarah's spending spree was particularly impressive. Designer clothes, jewelry, a new car for her husband, and a down payment on a vacation home they couldn't afford. She'd convinced herself that money was unlimited and consequences were for other people. The credit card debt she accumulated in just 1 week exceeded most families' annual income. But Michael's choices were even more revealing. Instead of financial purchases, Head made social moves that burned bridges and destroyed relationships. Head insulted his former boss during his resignation, treated longtime friends with newfound arrogance, and made public statements about his family's wealth that would be impossible to take back. My son had always been the most insecure of my children, the one who needed external validation and status symbols to feel worthy. His lottery winnings had amplified those weaknesses into character flaws that were now visible to everyone in his social circle. People were already talking about his sudden personality change, his bragging about money, his dismissive attitude toward people Head once treated with respect. Meanwhile, I was systematically gathering evidence of their fraud while they focused on spending money they didn't actually have. Bank records, communication intercepts, financial transaction records, witness statements. Eleanor's investigation had uncovered a paper trail that would be devastating in court, especially combined with the surveillance footage of Michael stealing the fake ticket. But the most damaging evidence came from their own words. Tyler's digital surveillance had captured dozens of conversations where my children discussed their plans to defraud me, their contempt for my intelligence, and their detailed strategies for stealing my assets. They'd created their own prosecution case through sheer arrogance and carelessness. 3 weeks into the operation, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Tyler reported that my children had begun the process of trying to claim their fake lottery winnings. They'd contacted the Ohio Lottery Commission with fabricated stories about finding an old ticket and were demanding immediate payment of their prize. This was the moment where fiction would collide with reality, where my children's greed would meet the brick wall of legal consequences they'd never considered. The Ohio Lottery Commission would quickly discover the ticket was fraudulent, and state investigators would begin asking uncomfortable questions about how my children had obtained it and why they were attempting to commit lottery fraud. But I wasn't finished with them yet. The legal consequences were just the beginning of their education. They needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal, and they needed to experience the same powerlessness and humiliation they'd planned for me. I called Patricia Williams and confirmed the next phase of our plan. As a respected geriatric psychiatrist, Patricia had connections throughout the medical, legal, and social services communities. Her involvement would give my story credibility and ensure that the proper authorities were notified about the elder abuse and financial exploitation my children had committed. More importantly, Patricia had contacts in local media who specialized in investigative reporting about crimes against seniors. My children's case had all the elements of a compelling news story: family betrayal, stolen lottery winnings, elder abuse, and financial fraud. Local news outlets would be very interested in exposing this kind of crime, especially during National Elder Abuse Awareness Month. I also contacted my attorney and updated my will. My children had assumed they would inherit everything when I died, but their actions had cost them that privilege. My estate would now be divided between charities that helped elderly abuse victims and a scholarship fund in Harold's name. My children would receive exactly what they'd given me, nothing. The revised will included detailed explanations of why I was disinheriting my children, supported by extensive documentation of their crimes and betrayal. Even if they somehow escaped criminal prosecution, they would never profit from their cruelty. The money they thought they'd inherit would instead help other families avoid the pain they'd inflicted on me. As I finalized the legal arrangements, I thought about Harold and what he would have wanted me to do. My husband had been a gentleman who believed in forgiveness and second chances, but had also been fiercely protective of our family's integrity and values. He would have been heartbroken by our children's betrayal, but he would have supported my decision to hold them accountable. Harold had worked his entire life to provide for our family, and had died believing his children were good people who would honor his memory. They'd stolen his final gift to me and mocked his trust. They deserved to face the consequences of those choices, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd lost through their greed and cruelty. The endgame was approaching, and my children still thought they were winning. They had no idea that their lottery ticket was fake, their future was about to be destroyed, and their mother was orchestrating every moment of their downfall. Soon, they would learn that Margaret Hanson wasn't the helpless victim they'd imagined. She was the architect of justice they'd never seen coming. The Ohio Lottery Commission's Fraud Investigation Unit moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 48 hours of my children's claim attempt, state investigators were asking pointed questions about the suspicious lottery ticket and the people who'd tried to cash it. Tyler's fake ticket had been expertly crafted, but it couldn't survive professional scrutiny from law enforcement specialists. Michael was the first to crack under pressure. When investigators showed up at his new house asking about lottery fraud, he panicked and immediately tried to blame Sarah for the scheme. His story kept changing as investigators pressed him for details, and within hours had contradicted himself dozens of times while inadvertently confirming that he'd stolen the ticket from our family home. Sarah's response was even more revealing. She hired an expensive criminal defense attorney using money she didn't actually have, then proceeded to lie to both her lawyer and the investigators about her involvement. Her attempts at manipulation were pathetic and transparent, especially when investigators showed her the surveillance footage of Michael taking the ticket from Harold's coat pocket. But the most devastating moment came when investigators revealed that the lottery ticket was completely fraudulent. My children had quit jobs, made major purchases, damaged relationships, and attempted to commit federal fraud over a piece of paper worth absolutely nothing. The humiliation was immediate and complete. Their attorney withdrew from the case within 24 hours after learning his clients had lied to him about fundamental facts. Michael's wife filed for separation after discovering the full extent of his financial recklessness. Sarah's husband moved out and took their children with him, unable to trust someone who'd proven herself capable of such elaborate deception. The news media coverage began 3 days later when Patricia Williams held a press conference about elder abuse in our community. She presented my case as a perfect example of how financial predators target vulnerable seniors, using my children's documented crimes as evidence of a growing problem that required public attention and law enforcement action. Channel 8 News ran the story during their primetime investigative segment, complete with hidden camera footage of my children discussing their plans to warehouse me in Sunset Manor while stealing my assets. The reporter interviewed me in my home, surrounded by photos of Harold and evidence of the life we'd built together, creating a stark contrast with footage of my children's luxury purchases. The public response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from neighbors, former colleagues, and complete strangers offering support and expressing outrage about my treatment. Social media exploded with comments condemning my children's actions and praising my courage in fighting back. But the most satisfying response came from Michael's former workplace, where his colleagues had watched him quit his job with arrogant dismissal of people he claimed were beneath him now. When they learned that his lottery winnings were fake and his behavior had been based on delusion, the gossip network went into overdrive. Everyone who had witnessed his transformation now understood exactly what kind of person he really was. Sarah faced similar social consequences in her community. Her new private school sent a polite but firm letter requesting she find alternative educational arrangements for her daughter after other parents expressed concerns about the family's integrity. Her country club membership was quietly revoked. Former friends stopped returning her calls. The financial destruction was equally swift and thorough. Both of my children had leveraged their fake lottery winnings into massive debt obligations they couldn't meet. Credit card companies, auto loans, and mortgage payments all came due simultaneously while their actual income had disappeared due to Michael's hasty resignation and Sarah's legal troubles. Within a month, they were facing bankruptcy while also dealing with pending criminal charges for attempted lottery fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. The legal fees alone were consuming what remained of their original $70 million lottery winnings, and their attorneys were demanding payment up front before continuing representation. I watched their destruction unfold with the same clinical detachment I'd once applied to medical emergencies. Every consequence was logical and predictable, every moment of pain was self-inflicted through their own choices. I felt no guilt about their suffering because they'd earned every bit of it through their cruelty and betrayal. But there was one final element of justice that needed to be addressed. My children had stolen Harold's lottery ticket, but they'd also spent 6 months living luxuriously on money that belonged to both of us. I wanted that money back, along with interest and penalties for their theft. My attorney filed civil lawsuits against all 3 children, seeking restitution for the stolen lottery winnings plus damages for emotional distress and elder abuse. The cases were ironclad, supported by overwhelming evidence and unlikely to face serious legal challenges. My children couldn't afford competent defense attorneys, and their criminal charges made settlement negotiations almost impossible. The financial recovery would take months to complete, but the outcome was certain. I would reclaim Harold's stolen legacy and ensure that our money was used for purposes we would have chosen together. College scholarships for nursing students, donations to elder care facilities, and support for families dealing with financial elder abuse. Harold's dream of making a difference in people's lives would finally be realized, just 60 years late and under circumstances he never could have imagined. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, reading through Harold's journal one final time, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since his death. Justice had been served, truth had been revealed, and accountability had been enforced. My children had learned exactly what their betrayal cost them, and society had been protected from their predatory behavior. They'd tried to steal my dignity, my independence, and my future. Instead, they'd given me the opportunity to prove that Margaret Hansen wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, a fighter, and someone who understood that true strength came from standing up to bullies even when those bullies shared your DNA. My children were about to spend the next several years rebuilding their lives from the ground up, hopefully learning lessons about integrity and consequences that they should have mastered decades earlier. Whether they emerged from this experience as better people remained to be seen, but they would never again underestimate their mother or take her kindness for weakness. The lottery ticket was burning a hole in Harold's coat pocket had revealed more than my children's greed. It had revealed their true character, and mine as well. The difference was that I was proud of what the crisis had shown about who I really was underneath the gentle grandmother facade. Margaret Eleanor Hansen was nobody's victim, and anyone who tried to treat her like one would learn that lesson the hard way. The civil lawsuit settlements exceeded even my attorney's optimistic projections. My children's desperate need to avoid additional criminal charges made them eager to negotiate, and their lack of competent legal representation meant they agreed to terms that heavily favored my position. Within 6 months, ID recovered not just Harold's stolen lottery winnings, but substantial additional damages for their attempted fraud and elder abuse. The financial restitution allowed me to establish the Harold Hansen Memorial Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting elderly Americans from financial exploitation and family abuse. The foundation provided legal assistance to seniors facing similar situations, funded educational programs about elder abuse prevention, and supported research into the psychological factors that led adult children to victimize their own parents. But more importantly, the foundation gave meaning to Harold's death and purpose to my remaining years. Instead of wasting away in the nursing home my children had chosen for me, I was traveling the country speaking at conferences, consulting with law enforcement agencies, and helping other families navigate crises involving elder abuse. My story had become a case study used in medical schools, social work programs, and criminal justice courses. The surveillance footage and documentation from my children's crimes provided perfect examples of how financial predators operated and how victims could fight back effectively. ID transformed from an intended victim into an expert witness whose testimony had helped convict dozens of other criminals who thought elderly people were easy targets. The irony was delicious. My children had tried to hide me away in an institution where I would be forgotten and voiceless. Instead, their actions had given me a platform to reach millions of people and effect real change in how society protected vulnerable seniors. Michael and Sarah had both served 18 months in minimum security prison for their lottery fraud and elder abuse convictions. They'd been released 6 months apart and were now living very different lives than they'd planned 2 years earlier. Michael worked as a clerk at a hardware store, sharing a small apartment with 2 roommates while he slowly rebuilt his credit and reputation. Sarah had moved across the state to start fresh, taking a job as a receptionist and living paycheck to paycheck while paying off the debts her spending spree had created. Jessica, my granddaughter, had reached out to me 3 months ago. Now 22 and finishing college, she wanted to apologize for her participation in her parents' deception and rebuild our relationship. We'd had several long conversations about family loyalty, personal integrity, and the difference between supporting loved ones and enabling their bad behavior. Jessica had been genuinely remorseful about her role in the lies, and I'd forgiven her completely. She'd been a teenager manipulated by adults she trusted, and her decision to reach out demonstrated real courage and moral growth. We now talked weekly, and she'd even applied for an internship with the Harold Hansen Memorial Foundation. But my relationship with Michael and Sarah remained severed. They'd both sent letters apologizing for their actions and requesting forgiveness, but their words felt hollow and self-serving. They were sorry they'd been caught, sorry they'd faced consequences, sorry their plan had failed. They weren't sorry they'd been willing to betray and abandon me when they thought they could profit from it. Forgiveness required genuine remorse and changed behavior, not just regret about getting caught. Until my children proved they understood the difference, I had no interest in rebuilding relationships with people who'd proven they would hurt me the moment they thought it was advantageous to do so. I'd learned that real family wasn't defined by shared DNA or legal obligations. Real family was defined by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. My children had chosen to forfeit their place in my family when they decided I was disposable. That choice had consequences they would live with permanently. But I'd also discovered new family connections through the foundation work. Other seniors had survived elder abuse, advocates who fought for elderly rights, young people like Tyler who used their skills to help vulnerable populations. These relationships were based on shared values and genuine caring, creating bonds stronger than anything I'd experienced with my biological children. My home was now filled with photos from foundation events, letters from families we'd helped, and awards recognizing the impact of our work. The walls that once displayed pictures of ungrateful children now celebrated meaningful relationships and purposeful accomplishments. Harold's lottery ticket had cost us everything we thought we had, but it had also given us everything we'd actually needed. We'd discovered the truth about our children's character before it was too late for me to protect myself. We'd found a way to make his death meaningful by helping other families avoid similar betrayals. We'd created a legacy that would outlast both of us and continue protecting people long after I was gone. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if my children had chosen differently. If Michael had told me about finding the lottery ticket instead of stealing it. If Sarah had expressed genuine concern about my welfare instead of plotting to warehouse me. If they'd seen their windfall as an opportunity to care for their aging mother instead of an excuse to abandon her. We could have had everything together. Financial security, family unity, shared purpose, and mutual respect. Harold and I had raised them with the values that could have made that possible, but somewhere along the way they'd decided that money was more important than family, that convenience was more valuable than character. Their loss was profound and permanent. They'd traded a loving relationship with their mother for temporary luxury and social status. They'd destroyed their own children's trust and respect. They'd sacrificed their integrity for money they couldn't even keep. But my gains were equally significant. ID discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, purpose ID never thought possible, and the deep satisfaction that came from turning personal pain into public service. ID proven that elderly people weren't helpless victims waiting to be exploited, and ID helped change laws and attitudes that would protect future generations of seniors. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, the same kitchen where ID first discovered Harold's hidden lottery ticket, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been transformational. ID lost the children I thought I had, but ID found the woman I was meant to be. Margaret Hansen was no longer someone's mother, wife, or victim. She was an advocate, a fighter, and a force for justice who would spend her remaining years making sure that no other family would have to endure what mine had experienced. The lottery ticket had promised millions of dollars. What ID gained instead was worth far more than money could ever buy. 2 years after my children's convictions, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything ID learned about forgiveness and family redemption. Michael was in the hospital following a heart attack, and his estranged wife had called to inform me that he'd been asking for me during his recovery. I sat in my car outside St. Mary's Hospital for 20 minutes, wrestling with emotions I thought ID resolved. Anger, hurt, disappointment, and underneath it all, the stubborn maternal love that never completely disappeared no matter how badly your children hurt you. Michael had stolen from me, lied to me, and planned to abandon me to die alone in a nursing home. But he was still my son, still the little boy ID rocked to sleep and nursed through childhood illnesses. When I finally walked into his hospital room, Michael looked older than his 45 years. The stress of the past 2 years had aged him dramatically, and the heart attack had left him fragile and frightened. For a moment, looking at him in that hospital bed, I saw the vulnerable child he'd once been instead of the calculating adult he'd become. "Mom," he whispered when he saw me. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly, sitting in the chair beside his bed. "But I needed to see for myself how you're doing." What followed was the most honest conversation Michael and I had shared in years. The heart attack had forced him to confront his mortality and evaluate the choices that had led him to this moment. He talked about the shame he felt about his actions, the regret about destroying our relationship, and the fear that he would die without ever making things right between us. But more importantly, he talked about understanding what he'd really lost through his greed and betrayal. It wasn't just money or status or luxury purchases. He'd lost the respect of his children, the love of his wife, and the security of knowing his family would be there for him when he needed them most. He'd traded everything meaningful for temporary wealth that had disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. I listened without commenting, evaluating whether his words represented genuine remorse or strategic manipulation designed to gain some advantage. Michael had proven himself capable of elaborate deception, and I wouldn't be fooled again by tears and pretty speeches about regret. After an hour of conversation, I told him I needed time to think about what he'd said and what kind of relationship, if any, we might be able to rebuild. I wasn't ready to forgive or forget, but I was willing to consider whether Michael had genuinely changed or was simply facing consequences that made manipulation seem appealing again. Over the following months, Michael proved his sincerity through consistent actions rather than empty words. Head begun attending therapy to understand how Head justified his betrayal of family members who'd loved and trusted him. Head started volunteer work with a non-profit that helped families reunite after conflicts over money and inheritance. Head reached out to Harold's siblings to apologize for his role in dishonoring their brother's memory. Most importantly, Head begun making financial restitution beyond what the courts had ordered. Even though money was tight and his income was modest, Michael was sending monthly payments to the Harold Hansen Memorial Foundation as his way of contributing to the positive legacy his theft had ultimately created. Sarah's journey was more complicated. Shed moved to another state and changed her name after her conviction, attempting to escape the public humiliation that followed our story's media coverage. Shed sent several letters over the years, but they focused more on her own suffering than on understanding the pain Shed caused others. Unlike Michael, Sarah seemed to believe that enough time had passed for everyone to move on and forget about her actions. She wanted forgiveness without accountability, reconciliation without admission of wrongdoing, and restoration of privileges without demonstration of changed character. I responded to her letters with the same clinical detachment ID applied to her prosecution. I acknowledged her communications but made it clear that words alone wouldn't rebuild trust that had been shattered by deliberate cruelty. If Sarah wanted a relationship with me, she would need to prove through sustained actions over time that Shed genuinely changed her values and priorities. Jessica had become the family success story ID never expected. Now 24 and working as a victim's advocate for elder abuse cases, Shed channeled her guilt about participating in her parents' deception into meaningful career choices that helped other families avoid similar tragedies. Jessica understood that redemption required more than apologies. It required changed behavior, consistent integrity, and commitment to making amends through positive contributions to society. Shed taken responsibility for her actions without making excuses, and Shed proven her sincerity through years of dedicated work helping vulnerable populations. We now had a relationship based on mutual respect and shared values rather than biological obligation. Jessica had earned her place in my life through character and choice, demonstrating that family bonds could be rebuilt on stronger foundations than DNA and childhood history. The Harold Hansen Memorial Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What started as a personal mission for justice had evolved into a national organization that had helped thousands of families prevent or recover from elder abuse. WED successfully lobbied for stronger legal protections, funded research that led to better intervention strategies, and trained law enforcement officers to recognize and investigate financial crimes against seniors. My story had become part of a larger narrative about elderly empowerment and family accountability. Speaking engagements took me across the country, where I met other survivors who'd found the courage to fight back against adult children who'd tried to exploit them. WED created a community of people who understood that age didn't equal helplessness and that dignity was worth defending regardless of the cost. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the change in how society viewed elderly people and family dynamics. My case had sparked conversations about the assumptions people made about aging, dependency, and family loyalty. It had challenged the narrative that seniors should be grateful for whatever treatment their children provided and had established the principle that elder abuse was a serious crime deserving serious consequences. As I prepared for my 70th birthday, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me to this point. 3 years ago, I'd been a grieving widow whose children were plotting to warehouse her in a substandard nursing home. Today, I was a respected advocate whose work was protecting vulnerable seniors across the nation. The transformation had been painful, expensive, and emotionally exhausting. But it had also been necessary, empowering, and ultimately redemptive. ID discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, found purpose ID never thought possible, and learned that sometimes the worst betrayals could lead to the most meaningful triumphs. Harold would have been proud of what ID accomplished with his unwitting final gift. The lottery ticket that was stolen from his coat had ultimately created something more valuable than money, a legacy of protection for vulnerable people and a demonstration that justice was possible even when it seemed hopeless. My children had tried to make me disappear quietly into an institutional corner where I would be forgotten and voiceless. Instead, their cruelty had given me a platform to speak for millions of seniors who faced similar threats from the people who should have protected them most. Margaret Hanson was no longer a victim of family betrayal. She was a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the unshakable principle that dignity was non-negotiable regardless of age, circumstance, or the opinions of ungrateful children. The lottery ticket had promised $70 million in winnings. What ID actually won was worth far more than money could ever measure. The knowledge that ID stood up to bullies, fought for justice, and used my pain to prevent others from suffering similar betrayals. Some victories couldn't be measured in dollars, and some prizes were worth more than any lottery could ever offer.